Welcome to the Seriously Social podcast with your host, Simone Douglas. Today's guest is Julian Carbone, local councillor in the Burnside City Council. He and Simone talk local politics, social media, and how the increasing cost of living space impacts demographics.
Okay, so I'm joined today on the Seriously Social podcast by Julian Carbone, who is a councillor at Burnside City Council. Julian, thanks for joining me today.
Simone, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. So perhaps you could give us the Cliff Notes version as to how you ended up in council and here today.
Yeah, it's a long story, but I'll give you the short version, of course, because today we're limited for time. It all started with a school report back in 1999.
Yep.
Okay, so a long time ago. And our teacher asked us to do a report on a political issue. Any political issue you like. Local, state, federal, go for it. And I remember all my fellow students going for the big federal issues, Mabo and immigration and all those things. And at the time, in the local paper, in the Messenger, of course, there was a big controversy over the new Burnside Library redevelopment. It was going to cost about $15 million, and it became very political because, of course, there was two parties that had views on the library. So I figured, well, why go federal? Why go state? I'll go for something right in my own backyard.
Yeah.
So I went along to council meetings. I spoke to the mayor, spoke to all the councillors. I then did my own market research. So I was going around and door knocking people's homes and doing surveys, in Burnside Village and so forth to get a bit of a feel for what people wanted and so forth. And I suppose I was hooked from that point on. And I remember the exact moment. I was having coffee with another councillor, who sadly has actually since passed away. But we're having coffee in her home, talking about the library, and she actually asked me, would you consider running for council? And I remember at that moment, because I would have been 17, and I thought, I never would have thought of it. And it's only until someone actually asks you, would you be interested in doing something like this? That's where it all started. So that was 1999. I ran in 2003. That was the sort of the next election that I was ready for. Didn't quite get on. I just missed out. But then the next election was 2006, and I got on.
Fantastic. So you've been on council for quite some time then?
No, not quite.
Not quite? You had a little break in the middle?
Yes. Yeah, we'll call it a break. But no, of course, elections, democracy.
Yeah.
So I've won elections, I've lost elections.
Okay.
So yes, there has been a couple of breaks in between.
How have you seen the political landscape during an election change with the advent, of digital media and social media? Like, what's been the impact when you're running a campaign?
Oh, tell you what, it's actually, that's a great question, because I do often compare, say, the 2006 election to, say, the last election, which was 2018, and how different it was and how my campaigning changed and so forth. And digital media, social media was front and centre of my campaign in 2018. In fact, my campaign T-shirts and caps and so forth, my sort of name and council was a little bit secondary. It was actually my Facebook handle. That was the prominent feature, because I want people to remember that rather than almost my surname or which councillor was and so forth. Just remember the handle and everything else will make sense after that. So that was a big thing. But generally speaking, I would say the workload has also increased over that time. People, they're paying a lot of money in rates, especially now. We've got to be conscious of money being spent and so forth. So people demand value.
Yes.
And I'm getting a lot more phone calls from residents, a lot more demands put on myself than, say, back in 2006, when people, they might phone you from time to time if there was an issue. But now the workload has probably doubled in that time.
Do you find that the boundaries have blurred too, to a certain degree, between personal and professional, in terms of that expectation of almost 24/7 access?
Well, yes, definitely with social media. I mean, people aren't going to call you, in the middle of the night.
No.
But they are going to tag you in a post,
Yes.
and they are going to write to you and so forth with a direct message and so forth.
Absolutely.
So yes, definitely, and also probably with just with text messages and
Yeah.
so forth. People tend to send those at all hours. So
They do seem to be happy to text you at 3 o'clock in the morning.
yes. They think, I won't disturb you. I'll just text you, but the phone's right there, so it does wake you up.
Well, and I think it's that thing too, like we tend to use our mobile phones as alarm clocks. So I was reading an article somewhere the other day that people generally will have reached for their smartphone within 15 minutes of waking. If you me, it's within 0.2 seconds because you want to see what you've missed out on the night before, what's happened or changed. But I guess one of the other things that I'm curious about is obviously, Burnside's a very well-established council, well-known council probably in Adelaide. What do you think are the challenges within that council area for businesses and business owners right now?
Yeah, well, to be honest, most of my concerns come from residents, not businesses as such.
Yeah.
And I say we have a lot of issues. We have a lot of issues, but fundamentally, we are an inner suburb council.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're obviously on the other side of Victoria Park, so we're very close to the city.
Yeah.
The cost of land is huge. I think it is around about sort of $1,200 a square metre. So
Wow.
just for land, we're talking big dollars.
Yeah.
So we are, there's this constant shift. People, often it's, our grandparents, grandma, grandpa, they've got a small 3-bedroom home on 1,000 square metre block of land. Okay. That generation are dying.
Yeah.
And so people are buying up these big blocks of land and putting 2 or 3 homes on them.
Yeah,
So we are noticing a big increase in our population and a big reduction in the amount of open space.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the challenges because, Burnside has some lovely open space areas like Burnside swimming pool and the parklands all around there. Do you think that over time there's going to be increasing pressure on planning departments and councils to kind of review and reframe some of the planning approvals and guidelines? They
are constantly reviewing the planning guidelines, but at the end of the day, we are very close to the city, and the cost of land is very, very high, so people tend to not put a value on their backyard as they used to once upon a time. They'd rather a courtyard home for $1 million compared to, maybe a large block of land, same sized house for 1.5.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think, it's always interesting to have conversations with people about what they've seen as the impact of COVID-19 and the restrictions. Obviously we're very lucky in South Australia. We, touch wood, come through reasonably unscathed compared to perhaps Victoria or some of the other eastern states in particular. But what are some of the concerns that residents and people have come to you with when we were dealing with shutdown and things like that?
Probably the biggest concern we had, which seems a little trivial given what's going on around the world with a lot of high death rates and so forth. But as a council, I suppose, speaking personally, the biggest change we saw, and the one that caused the most phone calls to myself and so forth, was the fact that we had to shut down our public spaces. So the pool, the library, playgrounds, all those sorts of things. When things were really bad, we had to shut them down. So people were even more isolated. They couldn't go to work. They had to stay at home, and they might have gone to the library to hire a book or a DVD or something, or taking their children to a playground. Because what else can you do when you're stuck at home? And so that was something that caused quite a bit of concern. That's now changed, of course. And things are improving. But
I think, though, that speaks back to that challenge you were saying about people not placing value on their backyards anymore, in terms of we have those smaller, more dense housing, things happening. And then you have something like this happen where you can't access those public spaces, or likewise you couldn't access the gym. So one of my friends owns like a gym, and she was saying that fitness equipment just flew off the shelves and sold out. You couldn't get hold of a kettlebell to save yourself. And I got really lucky in that I just purchased a whole heap of gym equipment, I think 3 weeks before this all went pear-shaped. But do you think that we're all forever going to be stuck with weighing up the cost of land per square metre and usable space and quality of life? Like, are we going to end up being, the likes of New York, for argument's sake, where kids never step foot on grass and, don't actually have a concept of climbing a tree?
Yeah, it's something we deal with every day.
Yeah.
It's complicated. I mean, as long as it's supply and demand, as long as the population continues to rise, because Adelaide keeps growing.
Yeah.
So you got people living out at 2 wells now, and that's considered almost metropolitan Adelaide.
So Expressway now is.
That's right. So
half
that's what we're looking at as far as Adelaide. So, and of course Burnside is a kilometre out of the city.
Yeah.
So are we going to become a New York and all live in apartment buildings one day, just 1K out of the city? Well, I suppose probably.
Yeah.
Eventually, all you got to do is look at Sydney and Melbourne and look at the inner suburb councils there and what they look like and what they feel like. I mean, we don't want to. I don't. That's not something that I want.
Yeah.
And I want to live in Burnside all my life, and well, I have, and I want to continue to live there. And I want a nice big backyard with trees and room to play and so forth, and wash the car on weekends. You want space. We all want space, but space is now coming at a cost.
It is.
And it's very high. And of course, we've got a lot of foreign investment coming into the States. A lot of people coming from overseas.
Yeah.
So we've got population growth here in Adelaide. We've got population growth across the country.
Yeah.
And as a world, we are increasing our population. So the supply is fixed.
Yeah.
We can't make more land in Burnside.
No.
What we have, we have. And the demand just keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah.
And well, we know where it's heading, but anyway, but that's for the future.
Yeah.
That's 20, 50, 100 years time.
Yeah.
What we're trying to deal with is what sort of Burnside do we want now that we can deal with.
Yeah.
And so we're putting laws around protecting our significant trees and so forth. We are lobbying the state government to keep open space requirements in place. Good open space requirements in place. So we're doing all we can to make the best for Burnside now.
Yeah, which I think is, tricky in terms of you have to, like you said, look at today, look at 5 years' time, and then you probably go as far as 20 as a maximum in terms of ongoing strategic plan for the council. Actually, that's a good question. So where is the strategic plan for the council up to in terms of years?
2030.
2030?
2030.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and oddly enough, that was only endorsed last night. So
really?
Good timing.
Yeah, that's excellent timing.
I suppose one other thing I've noticed, just sort of thinking about living trends and so forth, just in my time in council, we've noticed, and of course just in Burnside, we've noticed, of course, Knockdown Build 2, that's a given, but we've also noticed a lot more people living in apartment buildings.
Yeah.
So just in the last 10, 20 years, we've now got the air apartment building.
Yep.
Okay, so that's gone from an office block to residential.
Yep.
We've now got the Queen Victoria apartments, so that's gone from a hospital to
residential.
a residential apartment building. So that's a big shift. And we've also got the new Cedar Woods estate in Glenside.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a lights view style sort of living arrangement. So there again, more obvious, noticeable trends as to where things are heading.
Well, and
just in Burnside.
I think too, it's like in general cost of living. So an apartment's more cost effective. You've got less floor space to take care of, less electricity needs, all of those kinds of things. So.
Oh, look, that sort of style of living, it's not for me.
No,
it's not for me.
Nuts.
But people who live there, they love it. They love it.
Yeah.
They can go overseas. They can just
Yeah.
simply lock the front door and not worry about the lawn dying and so forth. So, look, there is definitely a shift in lifestyle arrangements. It's obvious all over the world, and we are seeing it just in Burnside alone. It's we are a supply-driven economy, a demand-driven economy. So that's where people are heading. But again, there's always going to be a market for apartments, and there's always going to be a market for people with houses and backyards and so forth.
I think too, when you were talking before about population growth, so obviously to a degree, population growth drives the economy. So, there's been a lot of conversation of late around the fact that right now migration and immigration is to a degree at a standstill unless you've got some kind of, special exemption or, a skills shortage or something like that. In Burnside itself as a council area, how focused are you guys on social diversity and inclusion when it comes to economic development? So is that a topic that you can speak to?
It's something we talk about. In fact, we talked about that only at a recent council meeting. We do have a very multicultural society. I mean, I live in Glenside, so we've got the Glenunga International High School just around the corner. So we do have a high proportion of people from China, from India, Southeast Asia, and so forth. So just walking around the streets, walking around Burnside Village, you can see that we do have a very multicultural, diverse little society.
Yeah.
And just looking at the restaurants that we have around the area. I mean, just literally around the corner from me again, we've got a lot of Italian restaurants, which of course I love. We've got again, some Indian restaurants and Thai and so forth. So we are I like to consider ourselves to be a very multicultural society. The Burnside is held in high regard overseas. So when people choose to live in Adelaide, there are a lot of people who specifically choose the Burnside area to live in because of, schools is a big part of it, and we do have to thank the Glenunga International High School because they've got the International Baccalaureate.
They do,
So that's a big driver for our area. But when you just jump on Google and speak to migration agents and so forth, Burnside always ranks very highly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was having a really interesting conversation with someone from Welcoming Futures the other day, and she was talking about the fact that diversity is a fact, but inclusivity is a choice. Do you think that, broadly speaking, are South Australians getting better at being inclusive of the diverse society that we have at our doorstep, or do we still have a long way to go?
I think we are. I think as an Australia, we are getting more inclusive.
Yeah.
My dad is naturally Italian. He wasn't. He was born here.
Yeah.
Okay, so he didn't migrate here, but his parents did migrate here.
Yeah.
So I have heard these stories of what my grandparents went through when they migrated in the 40s.
Yeah.
What my dad went through, growing up in high school in the 60s. And I just remember, to be honest, the sort of things we used to say and do when I was in high school when I was in school in the 80s and 90s. So it's a very different world, and you'd have to say we are certainly a lot more inclusive as a society.
Do you think it's important? That's a conversation that it's important that we keep having to keep moving towards being less exclusive, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Oh no! It's why would you stop?
Well, I'd absolutely agree with you, but I think often it's always interesting talking to those older generations in particular. So I think, like you said, as we move through, we grow and evolve. We become more informed. So digital and social media means that we access news much quicker, and we have a much better understanding of people's everyday experience. Some of our elder compatriots, and I'll put my mother in that bracket, are much more removed from that constant flow of information and understanding, and they kind of live in their own world. So I think, be great to see some initiatives, talking back to the library thing. So there's one where you can actually, in some libraries globally, did you know you can borrow a human instead? So what they have is people from all different walks of life, and you literally go into the library. It's a program that they run, and you can literally go, I would like to sit down with this human and have a conversation so that I can understand their experience. And I think maybe there's room for initiatives like that, to give older people who are perhaps going to those libraries an opportunity to learn something else.
I'm a big fan of our community bus program.
Yeah.
And I mean, half the people can drive.
Yeah.
Half these people are perfectly fine going to the shops on their own, but they take up the bus program, and we promote the bus program to make people more included in society. So it's not just simply getting up, getting dressed, going to the shops for for milk, and then coming home and then waiting for the same time next week. It's they make a day of it, so they get to see all their friends. It's makes life more enjoyable and so forth. We do have a lot of people who are elderly. They've probably lost their partner, so their husband or their wife. Children, of course, are off working and busy, and they've got their own children and so forth. So just in my street, in my suburb, you do see people who are a little bit isolated, from the world. And so that's why I'm always encouraging them to phone the council, find out what services are available. I'm always talking to the staff about our things like the bus program and so forth, and what more can we do to get people who could be isolated or borderline isolated to be more engaged in our community.
Yeah, nice. It's probably a really good spot to end on, Julian. Thanks very much for joining us today. And you'll be able to find all of the links to Julian's social media platforms as a councillor in the comments above. And thanks very much,
Simone, thanks for having me.
Cheers, no worries.
Thank you for listening to the Seriously Social podcast. See our website for more details at www.socialmedia.aok.com.au/podcast. Check the show notes for credits, music used in the program, and more details about our guests.